Commander Kalen Vance stood motionless as the negotiations reached their breaking point. The atmosphere in the neutral conference room aboard Nexus Point Space Station was electric with tension. Representatives from both the Interstellar Protectorate and the Eldorian Empire sat rigidly on opposite sides of the polished obsidian table, the stars visible through the viewport behind them seemingly dimmed by the hostility permeating the air. Princess Lyranaya of Eldoria leaned forward, her silver-blue skin catching the light in a way that would have been mesmerizing under different circumstances. Her violet eyes narrowed as she addressed the human delegation. The Cygnus Nebula falls under ancestral Eldorian territory, she stated, her melodic voice carrying a sharp edge. Your mining operations and military presence constitute a direct violation of our sovereignty. We demand an immediate withdrawal of all Protectorate forces. Kalen maintained his composure, his face betraying nothing of his thoughts. As the IP's chief negotiator, he had anticipated this demand. The princess's beauty was legendary throughout the galaxy, but so was her temper and sense of entitlement. He had prepared accordingly. With respect, Your Highness, he replied, his voice measured and calm. The nebula falls under shared jurisdiction according to the Galactic Concordat of 2387. Furthermore, our intelligence has documented 17 separate Eldorian incursions into demilitarized zones over the past solar year. He activated a holographic display showing time-stamped evidence. The Protectorate cannot and will not withdraw from legally sanctioned operations while these violations continue. A hush fell over the room. No one had expected such direct contradiction backed by incontrovertible evidence. The Eldorian delegates shifted uncomfortably, but Princess Lyranaya's reaction was far more volatile. Her face contorted with rage, pupils dilating until her eyes appeared almost black. In one fluid motion, she rose from her seat and strode around the table, her ornate robes swirling around her like liquid mercury. The Eldorian guards tensed but made no move to stop her. Their princess's temper was well known, and few dared to interfere. You dare, she hissed, now standing directly before Kalen. You dare to accuse the royal house of Eldoria of deception? You, a primitive species barely out of your planetary cradle. Kalen remained standing at attention, his gray eyes meeting hers without flinching. I present facts, Your Highness, not accusations. Something snapped behind Lyranaya's eyes. In a move that shocked even her own delegation, she leaned forward and spat directly into Kalen's face. The spittle, slightly luminescent due to Eldorian physiology, landed on his cheek and slid downward. There's my response to your facts, uniformed ape, she snarled. The room froze. Time seemed to stop as diplomats from both sides stared in horror. Spitting on an IP commander was not merely an insult. It was considered an act of physical assault under intergalactic protocol. Kalen didn't flinch. He didn't wipe away the spittle. His expression didn't change at all as he assessed the situation with cold precision. Then he moved. It happened so quickly that most observers later couldn't accurately describe the sequence of events. With fluid efficiency born of years of combat training, Kalen pivoted, caught the princess's arm in a non-injurious but inescapable hold, and with his free hand retrieved a clean white cloth from his pocket. Before anyone could intervene, he had the cloth secured firmly but carefully across Lyranaya's mouth, effectively gagging her without causing pain or restricting her breathing. The entire maneuver took less than 60 seconds. When he stepped back, Princess Lyranaya stood immobilized by shock, her eyes wide with disbelief and fury, the pristine cloth preventing further verbal or physical assaults. Kalen resumed his former position, standing at parade rest, his expression still professionally neutral, as if nothing extraordinary had occurred. He met the princess's outraged gaze steadily, a silent message passing between them. Actions have consequences regardless of royal status. The Eldorian guards finally reacted, weapons half drawn, while IP officers rose to their feet, hands hovering near their sidearms. Chaos erupted as accusations flew across the room in multiple languages, the translators struggling to keep up with the shouted protests. "This is an act of war," roared the Eldorian First Minister, his ceremonial headpiece quivering with indignation. Commander Vance acted in self-defense after a direct physical assault, countered Admiral Thorne, the senior IP representative, her voice cutting through the din. "Your princess spat on an officer of the Protectorate. Under Article 17 of the Diplomatic Protection Protocols, he was entitled to take reasonable measures to prevent further assault." Princess Lyranaya had recovered enough to remove the gag herself, crumpling it in her fist. Her face was a mask of humiliation and rage as she shouted in her native tongue, gesturing violently toward Kalen. Ambassador Valerius, a distinguished elder Eldorian who served as the princess's advisor and guardian, raised his hands for silence. Unlike the younger members of the delegation, his expression held calculation rather than blind outrage. "This session is suspended," he announced, his voice carrying the weight of centuries of diplomatic experience. "We will reconvene after both parties have had sufficient time to reflect on today's unfortunate events." As the delegations filed out through separate doors, Kalen found himself the subject of conflicting reactions from his colleagues, some nodding in grim approval at his controlled response, others concerned about the diplomatic fallout. Admiral Thorne gestured for him to follow her to a private chamber adjacent to the conference room. Once the door sealed behind them, she turned to him with a mix of exasperation and reluctant admiration. "Of all the ways to handle that situation, Commander, you chose perhaps the most unorthodox." "She assaulted me, Admiral," Kalen responded evenly. "Protocol dictates. Spare me the regulation quotes, Vance. I know you had the right. What I'm curious about is why you chose that particular response." She studied him intently. Most officers would have either ignored it or reacted with verbal retaliation. You chose a third path that was technically within regulations, but... She searched for the word, unexpected. Kalen's expression remained impassive. The princess needed to understand that actions have consequences, even for royalty. A verbal response would have escalated the situation into a shouting match. Ignoring it would have been perceived as weakness. "I chose the option that established boundaries while minimizing potential for further escalation." Admiral Thorne nodded slowly. "Logical as always." She sighed, running a hand through her silver-streaked hair. "Well, the diplomatic shitstorm is already brewing. I expect formal protests, demands for your removal, possibly even threats of military action." "I understand, Admiral. I accept full responsibility for my actions." Before she could respond, her communication device signaled an incoming message. "Thorne here," she answered, frowning as she listened to the voice on the other end. Her eyebrows rose progressively higher as the conversation continued. Finally, she said, "I'll need to discuss this with Commander Vance. We'll respond within the hour." She terminated the connection and stared at Kalen with disbelief. That was a direct request from Ambassador Valerius. "It seems the Eldorians aren't demanding your court-martial after all." She paused. "Instead, they're requesting you be assigned as Princess Lyranaya's personal security liaison and cultural attaché for the remainder of the summit." Kalen broke his stoic demeanor for the first time, genuine confusion crossing his features. "Admiral, that makes no tactical sense. The princess clearly despises me, and I'm aware of what just happened, Commander. Valerius claims this is to cool tensions and create an opportunity for cultural exchange. He specifically cited your impressive restraint and precision as qualities they wish to study closer." "It's a trap," Kalen stated flatly. "Almost certainly," Thorne agreed. "But it's a trap we can't afford to decline. The alternative is likely a complete breakdown of negotiations and possible military confrontation. Besides," she added with a grim smile, "it provides us with an unprecedented opportunity to gather intelligence on Eldorian intentions and capabilities. With respect, Admiral, I'm a tactical officer, not a spy." "You're whatever the Protectorate needs you to be, Commander," Thorne replied sharply. "And right now, we need you to accept this assignment and find out what game the Eldorians are playing." Her expression softened slightly. I don't like putting you in this position, Vance, but there's too much at stake. Kalen's jaw tightened, but he nodded once. Yes, Admiral. When do I begin? Immediately. Pack your essentials. You'll be relocating to the Eldorian diplomatic quarters within the hour. Meanwhile, in the opulent chambers assigned to the Eldorian delegation, Princess Lyranaya was in the midst of a spectacular tantrum. Priceless artifacts from across the galaxy lay shattered on the floor as she paced furiously, her skin fluctuating between shades of blue in response to her emotional state. That primitive animal humiliated me in front of the entire diplomatic corps, she raged, hurling another ornamental piece against the wall. I want him executed. Publicly. Slowly. Ambassador Valerius watched impassively, waiting for the storm to subside. When she finally paused to draw breath, he spoke in the calm, measured tones that had served him through centuries of political intrigue. My princess, I have already taken steps to address this incident. What steps? She demanded suspiciously. If you've accepted some meaningless apology. No apology has been offered or requested, Valerius interrupted smoothly. Instead, I have arranged for Commander Vance to be assigned as your personal security liaison for the remainder of our stay on Nexus Point. Lyranaya froze, her luminescent eyes widening in shock before narrowing dangerously. You did what? Consider the advantages, Your Highness, Valerius continued, unperturbed by her reaction. This human demonstrated something rare today, control. He was provoked in the most personal manner possible, yet his response was measured, effective, and remarkably nonviolent. He did not strike you, injure you, or even speak harshly to you. He simply contained the threat. I am not a threat to be contained, she hissed. Of course not, he soothed. But his reaction reveals much about both him and Protectorate training. Most humans would have responded with either cowering submission or brute force. He did neither. This makes him interesting. You wanted to spend time with this creature to satisfy your curiosity? I want you to observe our adversary up close, Valerius corrected gently. Learn his weaknesses, understand how he thinks, and perhaps, he smiled thinly, find ways to provoke less controlled responses that might damage the Protectorate's standing in these negotiations. Understanding dawned in Lyranaya's eyes, followed by a slow, calculating smile that transformed her features from merely beautiful to dangerously alluring. You want me to break him? I want you to study him, Valerius replied diplomatically. Whatever happens beyond that is, of course, at your discretion, my princess. Lyranaya considered this for a moment, then nodded decisively. Very well. I accept this challenge. Send the human to me. I shall make him regret his actions today, one way or another. Valerius bowed deeply, hiding his satisfaction. Young royals were so predictable in their pride and hunger for revenge. What Lyranaya didn't realize was that his true motives were far more complex than simple intelligence gathering. The Eldorian Empire faced challenges she was not yet privy to, and this unusual human might prove useful in ways neither she nor the Protectorate could anticipate. When Kalen arrived at the Eldorian quarters an hour later, carrying only a small regulation duffel containing his essentials, he was greeted by an atmosphere of frigid hostility. The Eldorian guards who escorted him through the ornate corridors made no attempt to hide their contempt, their hands never straying far from their weapons. The princess's private reception chamber was a study in opulence that managed to be both alien and oddly familiar. The furniture, while clearly designed for humanoid physiology, featured organic curves and materials that seemed to shift subtly with the light. The air carried faint traces of an unfamiliar scent, something like ozone mixed with exotic spices. Princess Lyranaya was seated on what could only be described as a throne, though it appeared to be grown rather than built. She had changed from her diplomatic attire into something more casual by Eldorian standards, though still formal by human ones, a fitted bodysuit of material that resembled liquid metal, topped with a draping overrobe that accentuated her slender form. Her expression as Kalen entered was one of studied disdain. "Commander," she acknowledged coldly, not bothering to rise. Your Highness, he replied with a correct bow. Neither too deep, which would suggest subservience, nor too shallow, which would be disrespectful. Let us establish the parameters of this arrangement, she said, her melodic voice carrying a dangerous undercurrent. You will accompany me when I require it. You will remain silent unless spoken to. You will maintain a distance of at least 2 meters from my person at all times, unless security concerns dictate otherwise. You will not touch me again under any circumstances. Her eyes flashed. Is that understood? Understand your wishes, Your Highness, Kalen replied evenly. However, I must clarify that my primary duty is to ensure your safety. If that requires physical contact or violation of the 2-meter perimeter, I will act accordingly. A flicker of annoyance crossed her features. You seem to misunderstand your position, Commander. You are here as a gesture of diplomatic goodwill, not as my actual protector. I have my own guards for that purpose. With respect, Your Highness, that is not my understanding of this assignment. Admiral Thorne was quite clear that I am to serve as your security liaison, which includes personal protection duties. His gray eyes met hers steadily. If you wish to amend the terms of the arrangement, I suggest you communicate directly. With the Admiral, Lyrania's skin rippled with suppressed anger, taking on a deeper blue hue. For a moment, Kalen thought she might actually strike him, but instead, she rose gracefully from her seat and approached until she stood just outside the 2-meter boundary she herself had established. Very well, Commander. We shall proceed according to the official parameters. Her smile was sharp as a blade. Your quarters will be adjacent to mine. You will be on call at all times. Your first duty begins in 3 hours. I am attending a cultural exchange in the station's observation dome. I expect you to be prepared and properly attired. She turned away in clear dismissal, then paused. One more thing, Commander. If you ever again take the liberty you took in the conference room, I will ensure that your career and possibly your life come to an abrupt end. Is that perfectly clear? Kalen met her gaze without hesitation. Crystal clear, Your Highness. And may I add, if you ever again assault me or any other Protectorate officer as you did today, my response will be equally clear. For the briefest moment, something like respect flickered in Lyrania's eyes before being quickly submerged beneath renewed hostility. She waved a dismissive hand, and one of the guards stepped forward to show Kalen to his quarters. The next days established a pattern of tense, formal interactions. Kalen accompanied Lyrania to diplomatic functions, cultural events, and negotiation sessions. She made a point of speaking to him only when absolutely necessary, often in tones of exaggerated patience, as if addressing a particularly slow child. For his part, Kalen maintained his professional demeanor, always alert, always precise in his duties, neither seeking confrontation nor backing down when challenged. The other diplomats watched their interactions with varying degrees of fascination and concern. The story of their initial confrontation had spread throughout Nexus Point, embellished with each retelling until some versions had Kalen performing impossible feats of combat prowess or Lyrania unleashing mysterious Eldorian powers. During the 4th day of this uneasy arrangement, Ambassador Valerius approached Kalen while Lyrania was engaged in a private discussion with delegates from the Arcturian Confederation. Commander Vance, the elder Eldorian, greeted him, his voice carrying the resonant quality common to his species, but tempered with age. I trust your accommodations are satisfactory? They are more than adequate, Ambassador, Kalen replied politely. Valerius nodded, studying him with eyes that held the wisdom of centuries. I must confess, Commander, you continue to surprise me. Most humans would have requested reassignment by now, given my daughter's challenging nature. Kalen raised an eyebrow slightly at the familial reference. It was the first confirmation he'd had of the exact relationship between Valerius and Lyrania. I follow my orders, Ambassador. Personal comfort is secondary to duty. Admirable, Valerius murmured. Tell me, would your sense of duty extend to additional responsibilities? Princess Lyrania, while formidable in many ways, has had limited exposure to certain Practical aspects of security. Recent events have made me concerned for her safety in situations where her guards might be separated from her. You're asking me to train her in self-defense, Kalen stated, cutting through the diplomatic language. Valerius's lips curved in a slight smile. Direct as always. Yes, Commander, that is precisely what I'm asking. Nothing elaborate, basic defensive maneuvers, threat assessment, perhaps some rudimentary combat techniques suitable for her physiology. Kalen considered the request carefully. It could be a genuine security concern, or it could be an attempt to learn protectorate combat techniques. Either way, it presented an opportunity to build a more productive working relationship with the princess. I would need Admiral Thorne's approval, he said finally, and the princess would need to agree as well. I can't imagine she'll be enthusiastic about the idea. Leave that to me, Valerius replied confidently. I believe I can persuade her of the necessity. He hesitated, then added in a lower tone, she can be headstrong, but she is not unreasonable once her initial resistance is overcome. Later that evening, when Kalen returned to his quarters after escorting Lyranaya back from the day's final event, he found a formal communication from Admiral Thorne authorizing the training sessions, along with parameters for what techniques could be shared and which were classified. Apparently, Valerius had wasted no time in making the arrangements. The first training session was scheduled for the following morning in a private exercise facility within the Eldorian diplomatic section. Kalen arrived early to inspect the area and prepare, dressed in standard IP physical training attire. A fitted black t-shirt and loose-fitting gray pants designed for maximum mobility. When Lyranaya entered, she too had abandoned her usual elaborate attire in favor of what appeared to be Eldorian athletic wear, a form-fitting bodysuit in deep purple that accentuated her alien yet humanoid physiology. Her silver-blue hair was pulled back in a practical arrangement, and her expression was one of resigned annoyance. "Let's get this over with, Commander," she said by way of greeting. "My father has convinced me of the utility of these sessions, but I remain skeptical." Kalen nodded, acknowledging her reluctance without challenging it. "We'll start with basic principles, Your Highness. The foundation of effective self-defense is awareness, followed by avoidance. Physical techniques are a last resort." "Spare me the philosophy," she replied impatiently. "I'm here to learn how to incapacitate threats if necessary, not to avoid them." "With respect, Your Highness, that approach will get you killed," Kalen said bluntly. "Even the most skilled combatant can be overwhelmed by superior numbers or firepower. The primary goal is always survival, not dominance." She opened her mouth to object, then closed it, studying him with narrowed eyes. "Survival without honor is meaningless in Eldorian culture, Commander. I'm not asking you to abandon your principles," he replied calmly, "only to recognize that you cannot uphold them if you're dead." A thoughtful expression crossed her features. A pragmatic perspective. Very human. She gestured impatiently. "Continue." For the next hour, Kalen guided her through basic awareness exercises, teaching her to identify potential threats in a crowd, to recognize the subtle signs that precede violence, to position herself advantageously in any environment. To his surprise, she proved to be a quick study, her natural arrogance giving way to intense focus when presented with concepts she found valuable. "Your spatial awareness is exceptional," he noted as she correctly identified all the potential weapons he had concealed throughout the training area. "Eldorians perceive energy fields differently than humans," she explained, the first piece of cultural information she had voluntarily shared with him. "What you see as separate objects, we experience as interconnected nodes in a continuous field. That's a significant tactical advantage," Kalen observed. "It would make ambushes nearly impossible against your species." "Not impossible," she corrected, "but more difficult, yes. However, it has limitations. Strong emotions can disrupt the perception, fear, anger, even surprise." Kalen filed this information away carefully. "Then emotional control becomes even more critical for your people in dangerous situations." She looked at him sharply, as if suddenly realizing she had revealed more than intended. "Enough theory," Show me how to break a hold like the one you used on me. He hesitated. That would require physical contact, Your Highness. You were quite clear about your boundaries. A complex emotion flickered across her face. Anger, embarrassment, and something like grudging respect. Consider those boundaries conditionally suspended for training purposes only. Very well. Kalen demonstrated the hold slowly, explaining each step. When it came time for Lyranaya to practice the escape technique, he found himself acutely aware of the differences in their physiology. Her skin was slightly cooler than humans, and there was a subtle electromagnetic quality to it, almost like the feeling of static electricity, but more controlled. Their training sessions continued daily, gradually expanding beyond defensive techniques to include discussions of tactical theory and comparative combat philosophies. To Kalen's surprise, these conversations became increasingly engaging as Lyranaya revealed herself to be not merely intelligent, but genuinely insightful, with a perspective shaped by a culture thousands of years older than human civilization. Your species relies too heavily on brute force, she commented during one particularly intense debate. You develop increasingly destructive weapons rather than refining your understanding of when and why force should be applied. And Eldorians rely too heavily on technological superiority, Kalen countered. When that advantage fails, as all advantages eventually do, you lack adaptive strategies. Instead of the angry retort he expected, she considered his words thoughtfully. There is some truth in that observation. Our military doctrine has remained largely unchanged for centuries, while yours evolves constantly, sometimes within a single generation. Necessity drives innovation, he said simply. The Protectorate has always faced opponents with superior technology or numbers. We adapted or died. Yet you didn't merely survive, she noted. You thrived, expanded, formed alliances where conquest would have been easier in the short term. She studied him with new curiosity. Why? What drives this approach? The question seemed genuine, not a diplomatic trap, and Kalen found himself responding with equal honesty. Human history taught us that empires built on fear and forced submission inevitably collapse. Stability requires mutual benefit and at least some degree of shared values. An idealistic perspective, she said, but without her usual dismissive tone. Idealistic, but practical, he corrected. The alternative is constant vigilance against rebellion, an exhausting and ultimately futile effort. Before she could respond, the station's emergency alert system activated, bathing the training room in pulsing amber light. The automated voice announced, "Security breach detected in Sector 7. All diplomatic personnel return to designated safe areas. Security teams to Sector 7. Kalen immediately shifted to alert status, his hand moving to the communication device at his wrist. Advance to security control. Status report. The response came through with alarming static interference. Unidentified intruders. Multiple casualties. Weapons fire in the main concourse. Communications being jammed. The transmission cut off abruptly. Kalen turned to Lyranaya, all pretense of formality abandoned in the face of potential threat. We need to get you to your secure quarters immediately. To his surprise, she didn't argue. The most direct route will be compromised if Sector 7 is breached. We should take the maintenance corridors. Kalen nodded, reassessing his evaluation of her tactical judgment. Do you know the access codes? Of course, she replied with a flash of her old haughtiness. I memorized the station's complete layout on our first day here. They moved quickly to the nearest maintenance access, Lyranaya, keying in a complex sequence that caused a previously invisible panel to slide open. The narrow corridor beyond was dimly lit by emergency lighting and hummed with the station's essential systems. As they navigated the labyrinthine service passages, distant sounds of conflict reached them. Weapon discharges, shouted commands, the distinctive whine of Eldorian energy weapons responding. The princess's earlier confidence began to fade as the reality of danger set in, her skin shifting to a paler shade of blue. Who would dare attack during a diplomatic summit? She murmured, more to herself than to Kalen. The combined security forces of multiple species would be... She trailed off as they rounded a corner and found themselves facing three figures in unmarked combat armor, their faces obscured by opaque helmets. The intruders reacted instantly, raising weapons of unfamiliar design. Kalen moved without hesitation, simultaneously pushing Lyranaya behind him and drawing his sidearm. The narrow corridor worked to their advantage, forcing the attackers to present themselves in a line rather than spread out. His first shot caught the lead attacker's center mass, the impact throwing them backward into their companions and creating momentary confusion. "Run," he commanded Lyranaya, firing again to keep the attackers pinned down. Junction 12A, 3 corridors back. The access panel there leads to a secure area. To his surprise, she didn't immediately flee. Instead, she pressed her palm against the control panel on the wall beside them. The corridor's atmospheric system suddenly reversed, creating a powerful vacuum effect that pulled the attackers off balance, while a containment field sprang into existence, separating them from Kalen and Lyranaya. "That won't hold them for long," she said urgently, grabbing his arm. "This way, there's a more direct route to the diplomatic quarters." They sprinted through the maintenance corridors, the sounds of pursuit fading behind them. Kalen remained vigilant, his weapon ready, hyper-aware of the valuable asset he was protecting. Not just a diplomatic figure now, but someone who had just demonstrated unexpected courage and resourcefulness under fire. When they finally reached a secure access point to the Eldorian diplomatic section, they found chaos. Guards were mobilizing, diplomats were demanding information, and Ambassador Valerius was issuing rapid commands in the Eldorian language. He turned as they entered, relief washing over his features at the sight of Lyranaya. "Thank the ancestors." When the attack began, and we couldn't locate you, he broke off, composing himself. "What happened? Were you targeted specifically?" "We encountered 3 intruders in the maintenance corridors," Kalen reported crisply. "Armed, professionally equipped, using non-standard weapons. They appeared to be heading toward the diplomatic quarters. Same as the main attack force," Valerius confirmed grimly. "They breached Sector 7 using falsified credentials and immediately targeted the conference areas. If the session hadn't been delayed this morning." "It was planned," Lyranaya said, her voice tight with realization. They knew the summit schedule. This wasn't random terrorism. Kayla nodded in agreement. Coordinated, well-equipped, with inside knowledge. Classic signs of a professional operation. He turned to Valerius. "Has there been any communication from the attackers?" "Demands?" "None yet," the ambassador replied. Though reports suggest they were attempting to access the central communication hub before station security managed to contain that sector. Before they could discuss further, Admiral Thorne's voice came through on the emergency channel. "All diplomatic delegations, this is Admiral Thorne. The immediate threat has been neutralized. 5 attackers dead, 3 in custody. Preliminary identification suggests they are mercenaries hired by the Orion Syndicate, though verification is ongoing. We are maintaining security lockdown while we sweep for additional threats or sabotage. All delegates are to remain in secure areas until further notice." After Valerius acknowledged the communication, Lyranaya turned to Kalen with an expression he had never seen before, vulnerability mixed with genuine gratitude. "You place yourself between me and those weapons without hesitation." "It's my duty," he replied simply. "No," she said, shaking her head. "Your duty was to protect me. Yes, but there were multiple ways to fulfill that obligation. You chose the one that placed you at greatest risk." She hesitated, then added quietly, "An Eldorian of your rank would have used me as a shield. Tactical value would dictate preserving the officer over the royal." Kalen frowned. "That's not how the Protectorate operates." "I'm beginning to understand that," she admitted. Then, with visible effort, she added, "Thank you, Commander." The simple expression of gratitude, clearly difficult for her pride to allow, affected Kalen more deeply than he could have anticipated. "You saved us both with that containment field," he acknowledged. "Quick thinking." A faint smile curved her lips. Perhaps your training has had some value after all. The station remained on high alert for the next 24 hours as security forces conducted thorough sweeps and interrogated the captured attackers. The diplomatic sessions were temporarily suspended, but informal discussions continued within the secure areas of each delegation. Kalen found himself summoned to a private meeting with Admiral Thorne and a small group of senior security officials. The Admiral looked grim as she activated a secure holographic display. "The prisoners have confirmed our initial suspicions," she began without preamble. "They were hired by interests within the Orion Syndicate, but the operation was too sophisticated for their usual work. Someone provided them with detailed intelligence about Nexus Point's security protocols, diplomatic schedules, and communication systems. An inside job," one of the security officers stated flatly. "Almost certainly," Thorne agreed. "But from which side?" "The Syndicate has no love for either the Protectorate or the Eldorian Empire. Disrupting peace talks benefits them regardless of who they're specifically targeting." Kalen considered the tactical data displayed before them. The attack pattern suggests they were primarily targeting communication systems rather than individuals. If their goal was assassination, they missed several high-value opportunities. "Precisely," Thorne nodded. "Our working theory is that they intended to access the central communication hub, either to gather intelligence or to plant misinformation that would derail the negotiations." "Or both," Kalen suggested. "The Syndicate thrives on conflict between major powers. The longer our diplomatic impasse continues, the more opportunities they have to exploit unregulated territories." The meeting continued with detailed analysis of security failures and required improvements. But Kalen found himself distracted by an uncomfortable realization. The attackers they had encountered in the maintenance corridor hadn't seemed surprised to find them there, almost as if they had expected to intercept someone using that route. When he returned to the Eldorian diplomatic sector, he found Princess Lyranaya alone in a small meditation garden that had been installed for the Eldorian delegation's use. The artificial environment featured plants from their homeworld, creating an ethereal landscape of crystalline vegetation that chimed softly with each recycled breeze. She looked up as he approached, her expression thoughtful rather than hostile. "Your security meeting has concluded?" "Yes, Your Highness." He hesitated, then decided on directness. "May I speak freely?" Her eyebrows rose slightly, but she nodded. "Please do." The attackers we encountered weren't randomly patrolling. They were positioned as if to intercept someone they expected to find in that corridor. He met her gaze steadily. Someone with knowledge of the stations, maintenance routes, and access codes. Someone like an Eldorian princess who had memorized the station's complete layout. Her expression remained carefully neutral. "Are you accusing me of collusion with terrorists, Commander?" "No," he replied calmly. "I'm suggesting that someone knew your habits and preferences well enough to predict your likely escape route in an emergency. Someone close to you." A shadow passed over her features. "That's a serious implication." "Yes, it is." He maintained his direct gaze. "Have you shared your knowledge of the station's layout with anyone? Discussed potential emergency routes?" She was silent for a long moment, visibly processing the implications. "Only my father and my personal guards. No one else would have any reason to." She trailed off, a new realization dawning. "But my guards rotate their duty schedules." All 16 of them would have overheard various conversations about security protocols. Kalen nodded grimly. "And how thoroughly are they vetted? How are they selected?" "They're from noble houses, sworn to lifelong service," she replied automatically, but doubt had crept into her voice. It would be unthinkable for an Eldorian of such standing to betray their oath. "Unthinkable doesn't mean impossible," Kalen said gently. "And betrayal often comes from where we least expect it." Lyranaya stood and began pacing, her movements fluid yet tense. "If what you're suggesting is true, if one of my own guard betrayed me, then the implications extend far beyond this attack." She turned to face him. "It would mean the corruption reaches into the heart of Eldorian nobility. Or it could be more targeted," Kalen offered. "Someone specifically compromised to provide information about you. What about recent additions to your security detail?" She frowned, considering. "Gareth R. joined 6 lunar cycles ago. He was recommended by High Commander Vexnor, my father's military advisor. Her eyes narrowed, and he has been particularly attentive to my movements and schedule. We should inform Admiral Thorne and your father, Kalen said, taking a step toward the exit. Wait! Lyrania's hand shot out, catching his arm. It was the first time she had voluntarily touched him. If Gareth AR is indeed compromised, alerting everyone might cause him to flee or destroy evidence. And if he's not acting alone, Kalen understood her logic immediately. We need proof before making accusations. Exactly. Her violet eyes held a new intensity. And we need to be careful about whom we trust with this suspicion. They spent the next hours developing a subtle plan to investigate Gareth AR without raising alarms. Using Lyrania's access and Kalen's tactical experience, they set up a monitoring system for the guard's communications and movements while creating an opportunity to examine his quarters during his next duty shift. As they worked, Kalen noted a remarkable transformation in the princess. Gone was the imperious, spoiled royal, replaced by a focused, intelligent strategist. She anticipated problems before he mentioned them, offered creative solutions to security challenges, and demonstrated a grasp of covert operations that surprised him. You seem remarkably skilled at clandestine planning for a royal princess, he observed during a brief break. A faint smile curved her lips. Eldorian royalty are trained in many disciplines from childhood, Commander. Court entry can be as dangerous as any battlefield. She hesitated, then added, besides, I haven't always been confined to diplomatic functions. Before my father insisted I take a more visible role in governance. I serve in our intelligence division. Kalen raised an eyebrow, reassessing everything he thought he knew about her. You were a spy. I prefer information specialist, she replied with a touch of her old haughtiness, but her eyes held a glint of humor. We all have our secrets, Commander. I suspect you have a few of your own. Before he could respond, his communication device signaled an incoming message from Admiral Thorne. All diplomatic personnel were being summoned to an emergency session. The attackers had finally revealed their purpose, and it was worse than anyone had anticipated. When they arrived at the emergency session, the atmosphere was tense with barely contained alarm. Representatives from all delegations were present, their usual political posturing replaced by genuine concern. Admiral Thorne stood at the central podium, her expression grave. Approximately 1 hour ago, we received a transmission from a vessel identifying itself as the Syndicate Command ship Obsidian Talon. She began without preamble. They have claimed responsibility for today's attack and revealed their true objective. They have planted multiple fusion devices throughout Nexus Point, powerful enough to destroy the station and create a massive shockwave through the surrounding space. Murmurs of horror rippled through the assembly. Nexus Point wasn't just a diplomatic facility. It was positioned at a critical juncture of interstellar travel routes. Its destruction would disrupt transport and communication across multiple sectors, potentially destabilizing the entire region. Their demands are straightforward, Thorne continued. They want control of the disputed territories in the Cygnus Nebula, the very territories we've been negotiating over. They claim to have operatives embedded within both Eldorian and Protectorate forces who will take command once the transfer is complete. Ambassador Valerius rose to his feet. This is preposterous. The Orion Syndicate is a criminal organization, not a legitimate government. They have no standing to make such demands. They have explosives planted throughout a station containing the diplomatic elite of multiple species, Thorne countered grimly. That gives them all the standing they need for the moment. Kalen leaned close to Lyrania, speaking in a low voice. This confirms our suspicions. The Syndicate has infiltrated both our organizations. She nodded slightly, her eyes scanning the room with new wariness. And they must have had help at very high levels to plant those devices. Station security performs regular sweeps for explosives. We need to identify those devices, Kalen murmured. If Gareth AR is involved, he might know their locations. As the diplomatic corps dissolved in a heated debate about response options, Kalen and Lyrania slipped away, using the chaos as cover. They made their way to the Eldorian security quarters, where Gagged would be storing his personal effects while on duty. The guards' quarters were spartanly furnished, reflecting the disciplined nature of Eldorian military tradition. Lyranaya used her royal override to access the room, while Kalen stood watch at the corridor junction, alert for any approach. Anything, he asked via the secure communication link they had established. Nothing obvious, her voice replied in his ear. His personal terminal is locked with military-grade encryption. I can bypass it, but it will take time. Time we don't have, Kalen reminded her. Try checking for physical evidence, hidden compartments, non-standard equipment. There was silence for several minutes, then a sharp intake of breath. Found something. A secondary communication device, not standard Eldorian issue. And she paused. Commander, you need to see this. Kalen made one final check of the corridor before slipping into the quarters. Lyranaya stood beside a concealed compartment in the wall, examining what appeared to be technical schematics. Station maintenance diagrams, she explained, spreading them out. With 7 locations marked. Her finger traced each mark. Environmental control, power distribution, structural support nodes. Perfect placement for maximum destruction, Kalen confirmed grimly. And look, timestamps for activation. The first is set to detonate in less than 3 hours. Lyranaya's expression hardened. We need to alert security immediately. Wait, Kalen cautioned. If the Syndicate has infiltrated station security as well, they'll be warned. We need to be strategic about this. She nodded in understanding. My father and your admiral, then? No one else until we verified the locations and developed a containment plan. They carefully documented the evidence before replacing everything exactly as they had found it. As they prepared to leave, Kalen's instincts suddenly flared in warning. He held up a hand, signaling for silence, then pointed to the door. Someone was approaching. Without hesitation, Lyranaya pulled him into a narrow storage alcove, their bodies pressed close in the confined space. Through a small ventilation slot, they watched as Gagged entered, accompanied by a human wearing the uniform of station security. The dignitaries are all contained in the emergency session, the human was saying, his voice low. Perfect opportunity to move the final components into position. The princess is there as well. Gagged asked, retrieving something from the hidden compartment. Confirmed, along with that IP commander who's been shadowing her. A cold smile crossed Gagged's features. Good. Their deaths will be particularly satisfying. The commander has been far too effective at his assignment, and the princess. He shrugged. She served her purpose as a distraction during the negotiations. The Syndicate has no use for entitled royalty in the New Order. In the alcove, Kalen felt Lyranaya tense beside him. Her hand found his arm, fingers digging in with surprising strength as she controlled her reaction to this betrayal. The conspirators finished gathering their equipment and left, discussing technical details about the explosive devices. Once they were safely gone, Kalen and Lyranaya emerged from hiding. We need to move quickly, Kalen said, checking his weapon. They're accelerating their timeline. Lyranaya's expression was transformed by cold fury, her skin taking on a deeper blue that almost shimmered with energy. I'll kill him myself, she hissed. A traitor to the Empire deserves no mercy. Justice later, Kalen reminded her firmly. Saving the station comes first. They made their way to a secure communication terminal where they could contact both Admiral Thorne and Ambassador Valerius without risking interception. After sharing their discovery and the timeline for the detonations, they received immediate authorization to form a small, trusted team to locate and neutralize the explosives. The first device is nearest, Lyranaya noted, studying the schematics they had memorized. Environmental Control Substation on Level 3. They moved quickly but cautiously through the station, avoiding main corridors where they might be observed by potential Syndicate collaborators. When they reached the substation, Kalen used his security clearance to bypass the locks, revealing a cramped space filled with atmospheric regulation equipment. There, Lyranaya pointed to an anomalous component attached to one of the main oxygen processors. That doesn't belong in an environmental system. Kalen approached carefully, examining the device without touching it. Definitely Syndicate design. Fusion core with a redundant detonator system. He frowned. This is military-grade technology, not something common criminals could access. Can you disarm it? Lyranaya asked, standing close behind him. Not without specialized equipment, he admitted. But we can contain the blast. He activated his communicator. Vance to Admiral Thorne. We've located the first device. Requesting immediate deployment of a portable containment field to Environmental Substation 3A. While they waited for the equipment to arrive, Kalen and Lyranaya discussed their next moves. With 6 more devices to locate and less than 3 hours before the first detonation, they needed to work efficiently. We should split up, Lyranaya suggested. Cover more ground. Kalen shook his head firmly. Too risky. If either of us encounters Garethar or his accomplices alone, I can handle myself, she interrupted, a flash of her old arrogance returning. Or have our training sessions taught you nothing about my capabilities? It's not about capability, he countered. It's about tactical advantage. Together, we present a more formidable opposition. Before she could argue further, 2 security officers arrived with the containment equipment. Trusted personnel verified by Admiral Thorne herself. Working quickly, they established a field around the explosive that would direct the force of any detonation into a controlled channel, minimizing damage to the station. With the first device secured, they proceeded to the next location, a power distribution node near the central docking bays. Here they found not only the explosive, but Garethar himself, making final adjustments to ensure maximum damage. Kalen signaled for silence as they approached from behind, using the maze of power conduits as cover. They were nearly in position when Lyranaya's foot dislodged a small tool, sending it clattering across the floor. Garethar spun around, weapon already drawn. "Who's there?" he demanded, eyes scanning the shadows. When he spotted Lyranaya, his expression shifted from alarm to calculated calm. "Your Highness, you shouldn't be here. It's dangerous. There have been reports of sabotage attempts." "Save your performance, Garethar," she replied coldly, stepping into the light. "We know what you're doing. We found your schematics." The guard's facade dropped instantly, his features hardening as he leveled his weapon directly at her. "A pity. I had hoped you would perish in the initial blast, blissfully ignorant of your role in all this." "My role?" Lyranaya's eyes narrowed. "Your petulant behavior during the negotiations, your provocations, they provided perfect cover for our operations." His smile was cruel. No one looks too closely at security arrangements when they're distracted by royal tantrums. While Garethar focused on Lyranaya, Kalen moved silently through the shadows, circling to a position behind the traitor. He caught Lyranaya's eye briefly, and she understood his intent immediately. "And the Syndicate promised you what in return?" she asked, deliberately keeping Garethar's attention. "Wealth? Power? A meaningless title in their criminal hierarchy." "Vision," he replied with genuine fervor. "The Eldorian Empire stagnates under traditionalists like your father, clinging to outdated concepts of honor and nobility while the galaxy evolves around us. The Syndicate understands true power, the power of adaptation, of embracing change rather than resisting it." As he launched into his ideological justification, Kalen made his move, lunging from the shadows with precision born of years of combat training. Yet Garethar was no amateur. He sensed the attack at the last moment and whirled to face this new threat, firing his weapon in the same motion. Searing pain tore through Kalen's shoulder as the energy blast grazed him, but his momentum carried him forward into the Eldorian traitor. They crashed to the floor in a tangle of limbs, Garethar's superior strength nearly overwhelming Kalen despite his injury. Then Lyranaya was there, applying the very joint lock Kalen had taught her days earlier. With perfect execution, she immobilized Garethar's weapon arm, forcing him to drop the gun with a howl of pain. The fight was brutal but brief. Working together with a synchronicity that belied their short association, Kalen and Lyranaya subdued the Eldorian Guard. As Kalen secured Gareth with restraints, Lyranaya examined his injury with concern. "You're bleeding," she observed, her fingers hovering near the wound. "It's superficial," he assured her, though the pain suggested otherwise. "We need to focus on the device." Using Gareth's tools, they carefully disabled the second explosive while waiting for the containment team to arrive. Once the traitor and the device were secured, they continued their mission with renewed urgency, racing against time to locate the remaining explosives. The next hours passed in a blur of tense searches, careful disarmament, and occasional confrontations with syndicate operatives. Working seamlessly as a team, they located and neutralized each device, their mutual trust growing with each successful intervention. By the time they found the final explosive, hidden in the very conference room where their initial confrontation had occurred, they were exhausted but determined. This device was larger than the others, clearly designed as the primary charge. "The detonator is different," Kalen noted, examining it carefully. "More sophisticated. It might be remotely linked to the others." "A fail-safe," Lyranaya suggested. "If the other devices are compromised, this one could still be triggered." As if in confirmation of her theory, the device suddenly emitted a series of rapid beeps, a digital display activating to show a countdown, 5 minutes and decreasing. "Someone's activated it remotely," Kalen said grimly, already opening the access panel to expose the internal components. "Containment won't be enough for this one. We need to disarm it completely." Lyranaya knelt beside him, her earlier exhaustion forgotten. "Tell me what to do." Working together, they traced the complex circuitry of the detonator, identifying the critical connections that needed to be severed without triggering the fail-safe mechanisms. Kalen's technical training and Lyranaya's inherent understanding of energy systems complemented each other perfectly as the seconds ticked away. "The primary circuit is isolated," Kalen announced, sweat beading on his forehead despite the station's regulated temperature. "But there's a secondary trigger I can't reach without destabilizing the whole assembly." Lyranaya studied the problem, then removed one of the ornate rings from her finger, a piece of Eldorian technology disguised as jewelry. "This contains a focused energy dampener. If we calibrate it correctly, it might neutralize the trigger without physical contact." With less than a minute remaining, they made the necessary adjustments, Lyranaya's hand steady as she positioned the device precisely over the secondary trigger. "Ready?" Kalen nodded, his hand poised to cut the primary circuit at the exact moment the dampener activated. "Now!" There was a brief pulse of energy, a moment of heart-stopping uncertainty, and then the countdown froze at 7 seconds before going dark. The explosive was inert. For several seconds, they remained motionless, scarcely daring to believe they had succeeded. Then Lyranaya let out a shaky breath, slumping slightly as tension drained from her body. Without thinking, Kalen put his arm around her shoulders, offering support. She didn't pull away. Instead, she turned toward him, violet eyes meeting his gray ones with an intensity that transcended exhaustion. "We did it." "We did," he agreed, suddenly acutely aware of their proximity and the strange, electric connection that had formed between them during their ordeal. Before either could say more, the door slid open to admit Admiral Thorne and Ambassador Valerius, accompanied by security teams. The moment broke as Kalen and Lyranaya separated to report their success. In the aftermath of the crisis, Nexus Point gradually returned to normal operations. The syndicate plot had been thoroughly dismantled, the remaining operatives captured or driven off. With the immediate danger past, the diplomatic negotiations resumed, but with a notably different tone. Having faced a common enemy, both the Protectorate and Eldorian delegations approached the territorial disputes with newfound perspective. The shared experience had revealed the cost of continued conflict and the value of cooperation. Ambassador Valerius, in particular, seemed transformed by the events, advocating for compromise solutions that would have been unthinkable days earlier. In private conversations with Kalen, He admitted that watching his daughter work alongside a human to save countless lives had challenged his long-held beliefs about Eldorian superiority. "She has changed," he observed during one such discussion, "in ways I could not have anticipated when I assigned you as her security liaison." "We've both changed," Kalen acknowledged. "Circumstances required us to see beyond our preconceptions." Valerius studied him thoughtfully. "And what do you see now, Commander, when you look at my daughter? Not the princess, not the diplomat, but Lyranaya herself?" The question caught Kalen off guard with its directness. After a moment's consideration, he answered honestly, "I see someone of remarkable strength and intelligence. Someone who can set aside pride and prejudice when it matters. Someone I have come to respect deeply." "Only respect?" Valerius asked, his ancient eyes seeming to look directly into Kalen's carefully guarded thoughts. Kalen maintained his composure. "It would be inappropriate for me to express anything beyond professional admiration, Ambassador." "Ah, propriety," Valerius sighed. "Another trait our cultures unexpectedly share." He rose to leave, then paused. "She will be returning to Eldoria when the summit concludes tomorrow. Our delegation has been recalled to address the security breach Grethar's betrayal represents. I thought you should know." The news settled like a weight in Kalen's chest, though he had always known their unusual partnership was temporary. "I understand. Thank you for informing me." That evening, as Kalen prepared his report for Protectorate Command, a chime announced a visitor to his quarters. When the door slid open, Lyranaya stood before him, dressed not in her usual formal attire, but in simpler clothing that reminded him of their training sessions. "Your Highness," he greeted her formally, stepping aside to allow her entry. "I wasn't expecting you." "Formality seems rather pointless now, doesn't it?" she replied, entering his quarters with the same regal bearing that had once irritated him but now seemed an integral part of her character. "After everything we've experienced together." "Old habits," he acknowledged with a slight smile. "What can I do for you, Lyranaya?" She seemed pleased by his use of her name without the title. "My father tells me you've been informed of our imminent departure." "Yes," he confirmed. "Security concerns on Eldoria require attention." "Always the diplomat," she observed wryly. "You don't need to pretend with me, Kalen. I know what this mission has meant, what we have accomplished together." He hesitated, uncertain of the boundaries in this new, undefined territory between them. "It's been extraordinary," he finally admitted. "Working with you has challenged many of my assumptions, as it has mine." She moved closer, studying his face with an intensity that made his pulse quicken. "I came to tell you that I've requested a new assignment, liaison to the Protectorate for Security Cooperation. If approved, I would be stationed at IP headquarters." The implications of this statement hung in the air between them. It was an unprecedented proposition, an Eldorian royal serving in an official capacity within Protectorate territory. "That would be beneficial for both our peoples," Kalen said carefully, not daring to acknowledge the personal dimension of her announcement. A smile curved her lips, amused by his restraint. "Always the perfect officer." She stepped closer still, close enough that he could detect the subtle electromagnetic field that surrounded all Eldorians. "Would it surprise you to learn that my father supports this assignment? That he believes our cooperation has demonstrated the potential for a new kind of relationship between our species?" "Ambassador Valerius has shown remarkable adaptability," Kalen observed, increasingly aware of her proximity and his own response to it. "As have we," she replied softly. Then, with the same decisiveness she had shown throughout their mission, she closed the remaining distance between them and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was at once alien and achingly familiar. Her skin cooler than humans, that subtle energy field creating a tingling sensation where they touched, yet the gesture itself transcending species differences to express something fundamentally the same across cultures: connection, desire, the breaking of final barriers. When they separated, Kalen found himself at a rare loss for words. Lyranaya smiled, seemingly satisfied with his reaction. "Something to consider while my assignment is processed," she said. "A promising area for further cultural exchange. I believe the Protectorate would be very interested in pursuing such exchanges, he replied, finding his voice at last. Good. She moved toward the door, pausing before exiting. Tomorrow we return to our formal roles for the conclusion of the summit. But remember this moment, Commander Kalen Vance. It represents a beginning, not an ending. After she left, Kalen stood motionless, processing the extraordinary turn of events his life had taken since that moment in the conference room, when a haughty Eldorian princess had spat in his face, and he had responded with calculated restraint rather than anger. From antagonists to reluctant partners, from partners to comrades in arms, and now to something neither of their cultures had terminology to properly describe. They had traversed an impossible distance in mere days. As he looked out at the stars visible through his viewport, Kalen reflected that perhaps this was how genuine change always occurred. Not through grand diplomatic gestures or formal treaties, but through individual connections forged in crucibles of shared challenge and mutual discovery. Tomorrow would bring complications, cultural barriers, bureaucratic obstacles, and the skepticism of those who preferred the comfort of established enmities. But for tonight, he allowed himself to anticipate the possibilities of this unexpected new mission, one far more profound than simply keeping a troublesome princess in check. After all, if an Eldorian royal and a Protectorate commander could move from hostile confrontation to mutual respect and beyond in the span of 2 weeks, what other seemingly insurmountable divides might prove crossable with sufficient courage and openness? It was, Kalen decided as he returned to his report with renewed purpose, a question worth exploring, preferably with a certain violet-eyed princess at his side.